Alright, before I begin this video, I quickly want to say sorry for no real intro. You saw the title, you know what you're getting. I'm just gonna play it because today I'm running late for something, but shout out to this person for commissioning this video and enjoy. Okay. So as for this specific what if, I think that a perfect place to start all this off would definitely be around the middle school days. Yeah, middle school days. Because one, Deku is still going to be quirkless in this timeline. However, it's not going to be forever because Deku is essentially going to be a late bloomer, so to speak. So he's going to be classified as quirkless for the first couple of years of his life until he eventually would unlock his quirk, which seemed to be like that he was quirkless just because Deku never really got angry. He never really had a moment in time where he really felt rage. He really felt that way. And so Deku never was able to activate his quirk no matter how hard he tried. And even though the doctors found the joint ligament that, you know, he didn't have it, they were like, well, we kind of just have to say he's quirkless because, I mean, nothing here shows us that he is going to be having a quirk or going to be activating a quirk anytime soon. So let's just tell the mom that he's quirkless and call it a day. And so that's what happens. And basically why I'm going to be starting everything off in middle school is going to be for the simple fact that I really want to set up just a really cool, like, walking through the hallway scene, right? And let's say that middle school, because I know that middle school is until 8th grade. For me personally, I was in middle school until 8th grade. I don't know about you guys, but I was. And the way that I'm going to be taking this story is that I'm going to be saying that this happens in 7th grade. So 1 year before the whole sludge villain incident takes place. Okay, so on this particular day, Deku would basically just be walking through the hallways and Izuku was like sort of jotting things down in his notebook. He just watched another hero fight thingy on his TV and Izuku was just extremely excited, getting ready to get started with his day and stuff, right? It hasn't even been the first period of school yet. And it would be in this specific moment that Bakugo, seeing Izuku, would have just a mischievous smile as he would just stick his foot out and Izuku would fall over it, just being like, Bakugo, watch where you put your feet. But Bakugo turns to Deku and just goes, what was that, loser? As he blasts an explosion in his hand. And then Deku goes, nothing. He would get up and then begin walking as Bakugo would just begin saying dumb things to Deku, basically making him feel like the garbage of the world, as eventually Deku would turn towards him with an angry expression similar to what happens in the first episode of the anime. Now, in this moment, Bakugo would say, what, you want to go, kid? As he would grab Izuku by the collar and basically slam him on one of the lockers, as he would go on to tell Deku that he's nothing, he's worthless, he's never gonna be nothing, and he might as well just take a swan dive off the roof, considering he's never gonna become a pro hero like he is. Maybe in his next life he can reincarnate with some quirk or something. As Bakugo would laugh and his lackeys would even look at him and say, whoa, Bakugo, that's taking it a bit too far. But Bakugo looks at them and goes, shut it. Maybe I haven't taken it far enough. You know, Deku, for this whole time, I've every now and then, I confused myself. You know, Deku, this whole time I've been taking it easy on you. But I think that your quirklessness has begun bothering me a little more recently. So how about we do this? As he would go on to basically shove Deku in a locker and then just laugh at him as he would wait for Deku to get out of it, and Izuku would eventually get out of the locker when the janitor was walking around after cleaning everything for a while, right? This would be like 3 periods in, so Izuku was already in trouble and he was sitting there in the dark. He was hungry. He hadn't even had breakfast yet. So Izuku was having an awful day. He was already upset. Eventually, Izuku would find himself in the final period of the, not the final period of the day, but the period just before lunch. And what would pretty much end up going down is that Izuku would end up finding himself in the bathroom as he makes his way there. You know, he's trying to freshen up. He's tired. He needed to take a leak. And as he was there, he heard Bakugo's voice. So he tried hiding in one of the bathroom stalls, but eventually his stomach made a noise because he was so hungry and he had to wait until lunch. So Bakugo, hearing this, would slam the door open, and seeing Izuku, he would have a evil smile on his face as Bakugo would grab Deku by the hair, by his collar, and shove his face into the toilet bowl. Mind you, Izuku had just used the bathroom, so he hadn't even had time to flush it, right? And the reason that Izuku was using a toilet instead of like the urinal is because I personally use the toilet just because like I really don't like the fact that the pee like bounces back at you. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever peed with shorts on, but you can feel that the water like low-key like sprinkles back at you, and I really find that disgusting. And so does Izuku. because I'm making the video, so I'm right. Anyways, so yeah, Izuku would find himself in that situation, and he is getting mad. Mind you, lunch has already started, and Bakugo, instead of having fun with everybody else, is here busy bullying Izuku. Eventually, Izuku would find himself in a position where he literally can't breathe, and it would be in this moment that Izuku would hear something in the back of his head going, "Smash!" As it would be a deep, deep, deep voice, as Izuku in that moment would begin turning green. Right, not just his hair, but his actual skin. His shirt would begin tearing apart as Izuku would become giant, and Bakugo seeing this would be like, huh? What the? As Deku would grab Bakugo by the face, and Bakugo, like, not liking this, would shoot explosions at Deku, but Deku's just sitting there tanking them, as Bakugo would be like, what the? Like, just thinking to himself, like, how do I get out of this? And Deku would grab his face as he slams him out of the door. Like, mind you, Bakugo would have closed the door to the bathroom, so it was just Deku and Bakugo in there. Pause. But yeah, he would get slammed out of there, and basically Deku would grab Bakugo by the face, still holding on to him. He would smash through 3 walls, 3 entire walls, smashing into the cafeteria eventually, as everybody would watch as Izuku was transformed into this giant monster, which basically has no rhyme or reason. He's just angry, and he's taking it all out on Bakugo. In this moment, Bakugo would be on the ground completely unconscious, as Deku would let out a gigantic roar, and the students around would immediately begin rushing out of the cafeteria, with some of them being like, "Wait, is that Deku?" Some of them would ask, but Deku would just continue going crazy, throwing like tables, chairs, like ripping apart everything and anything that he could get his hands on. And eventually he would start basically ripping through even the walls of the school. The mayhem would grow so large, in fact, that a pro hero would actually have to arrive on the scene. And this pro hero would be none other than Midnight. Because if it was anybody else, Deku was probably going to go to jail because he was going to destroy them completely, and he was probably going to be put on like a watch list or something like that because of what happened. But Midnight would arrive, tell Izuku that he's being a bad boy, because I don't know, I just feel like that's something Midnight would say due to her character, and then she would use her pheromone gas thing or whatever and knock Deku out, which would eventually cause, like, Deku would rush at Midnight and grab a hold of her shoulders, like squeezing her, but he would pass out right as he would do so, and Midnight would be terrified, like, this kid literally sat there and tanked that for so long, like, I can't even believe it. But once Izuku would wake up, he would find himself in an actual jail, like in a jail, not jail, jail cell. As Deku would like be wondering like what happened, and it'd be in this moment that, you know, one of the police officers, Tsukachi or whatever it is his name is, the guy that All Might usually talks on the phone with, would end up basically telling Izuku that he went crazy at the school, asking him if he really doesn't remember what happened. With Deku saying he doesn't, he just remembers that Bakugo was, as he stops talking and just looks at Tsukachi, as he would say, well, what happened? And he would end up telling him that he and his quirk went crazy. He destroyed a huge chunk of the school. And Deku would look at him and say, did I really do that? Just looking at his hands before looking up at him and going, wait, but how would I even do that? I'm quirkless. I don't have a quirk. I'm not even strong. Bakugo will tell you, I'm quirkless. And then he would say, you hospitalized Bakugo. He's currently getting treated, but rest assured, he is stable. And Deku would be like, there's no way. Suddenly in this moment, Tsukachi would tell him that his files also show that he's quirkless, so he's shocked, but from his understanding, he potentially might have been a late bloomer. And so Izuku would look at him and ask him like, well, am I in trouble? Like, is there anything I can do? I promise I didn't mean to. Tsukachi would look at him and say, well, no, you're not in trouble, kid, but you are going to be needing to, like, try to control your quirk in some sense of the word. As Deku would look at him and say, all right, I'll see what I can do. As it would be in this moment that Izuku, because of what ended up going down in the school, much like Broly, would actually end up having a shock collar. But instead of shocking him, this specific collar would shoot out like the gas pheromone thing that would like essentially knock him out, by that Midnight uses, right? So if he was to go crazy, like somebody could press the button and the button itself would actually be given to the principal of the school, as well as Inko, his mother, and not Izuku's teacher, just I think the principal and Inko is a good starting point for now. So Izuku would have to walk around life with this like shock collar looking thing. It's very thin, it doesn't like look bulky, and it doesn't bother Deku, but it is there, and Deku, it serves as a reminder for Deku not to go crazy with this quirk. Obviously, Deku seeing the pictures of the destruction that he did to this school would definitely lead Deku to be like, okay, I can't lose control. And when he would return to school, everybody would look at him completely different. No more was that stigma of Deku's a weakling, Deku can't hurt me. Like, nobody was messing with Deku, and even people who used to like talk to Deku aren't even like talking to him because of the fact that they're scared of him. Right? Bakugo would eventually return to school about 2 weeks later after his injuries and a couple of his ribs have healed, and he would look at Deku with this grimace of like, I hate you, Deku. Looking at him, telling him that he never knew he had a quirk this whole time, and asking him why he would let all those things happen if he could have defended himself this whole time, telling Deku that he swears on his life that he's gonna destroy him and his weak quirk. As from here, Bakugo would walk off in crutches as Deku would be like, sorry, Bakugo, I really didn't mean to do it. I just got so angry. And Bakugo would say, yeah, well, now you know how I felt having you around as a quirkless loser in my way every day. As he would walk off with the crutches, and Deku would have a little bit of anger in the back of his head. Now, for some reason, Deku was like more prone to anger for some strange reason. But Deku would ultimately calm down, do some breathing exercises, and eventually Izuku would return home, where we're now going to be having a 1-year time skip. And no, during this 1-year time skip, Deku's not going to sit here and all of a sudden master his Hulk quirk. It's not happening. Deku still is going to be prone to losing control in some moments because it just makes so much more sense. That said though, Izuku would now find himself on the day of the sludge villain attack. And here would be where I could see another interesting interaction going down. This day, I don't see Bakugo and his goons bullying Deku. Instead, I see Bakugo trying to challenge Deku to a fight, telling him that he's ready for him now. But Deku would just look at him and tell him that he doesn't want to use his quirk, he doesn't want to hurt him. And so Bakugo would end up literally just beating on Deku, like telling him, use your quirk, after class would end. But Deku would resolve himself and not use it, saying that he's not going to do it. As Bakugo eventually, after hitting him a couple times, would just leave him, like gritting his teeth, saying, when are you finally gonna learn to use your quirk, you loser? Don't lose control, just use it the way I do, and we could finally settle the score. You've been dodging me for a year, Deku. As Izuku would just look at Bakugo and just be like, I'm sorry, Bakugo. As he would walk off, grab his stuff, his notebook, and eventually realizing that he's late for his mother's birthday dinner, he would end up just being like, I'm late. As he would make his way towards the same path that he would take in the original story in which he met the sludge villain, right? But difference being this time around that when Deku would actually be captured by the sludge villain, a whole world of changes are going to be going down, because A, now Deku has a quirk, and B, the sludge villain is definitely going to be ticking Deku off. The second that the sludge villain would capture Deku and tell him that, you know, there's some freak in town that he needs to borrow his body, and he begins suffocating Deku in this moment would begin like freaking out internally, like just like, is this it? Like, am I really going to die? But suddenly he could hear that voice once again that would just scream out, smash! And so Deku in this moment would just be like, that's right, my quirk. And so Izuku would just give in to the rage, just immediately thinking back to what happened with Bakugo, thinking about how he wants to become a hero, just thinking about everything wrong in his life. And Izuku would snap out of it, instantly turning into the Hulk, as with the loud roar and the him just like stretching his arms out, the sludge villain would be splattered all over the wall as Deku would jump up into the air and begin smashing the puddle that the sludge villain left behind, creating a massive crater. As eventually All Might would end up arriving, and seeing that this was going down, All Might would think that this is probably another villain, and so All Might would get ready to throw a Texas Smash, just trying to send Deku flying with just the air pressure. But Deku would stand there, look at All Might and be like, what is puny man doing here? As All Might would look at Deku and be like, what the? As Deku would rush in at All Might and punch him square in the jaw, sending All Might flying into one of the walls, as All Might would now sit there and get up just like completely discombobulated. Mind you, the Nomu was able to absolutely stun All Might, but Deku was just so much stronger. Unfortunately for Deku, he's not smart enough to fight All Might if All Might gets all strategic with it, you know? But All Might now would get up because Deku was about to come in and like smash him again, but All Might would run out of the way because he is faster, not stronger, but minimally faster, right? And so now Deku would find himself in the situation where he is just absolutely going crazy. Like, he's trying to rip All Might's head off in this moment, and All Might is doing his absolute best to hold Deku off. Mind you, All Might's time limiter is already practically on 0, so All Might even staying in his buff form would just be causing him all sorts of trouble. But Izuku would eventually, or no, sorry, but All Might eventually noticing this collar thing that's like seemed to be like glowing. It was like glowing purple. All Might would wonder if like maybe that's like some sort of weak spot that can help him in any way, shape, or form. And so All Might would actually end up using his speed to dodge one of Izuku's punches and then like smack away, like smack at the neck, like smack right at the neck area of Izuku, smashing the collar, as the collar would then release like pink gas into the air, with Midnight immediately recognizing it and being like, this is the kid. As it'd be in this moment that Deku would fall completely unconscious, and All Might would sit there just looking at Izuku as he's like, this kid is a monster. He is a like, I don't even like, All Might would just be sitting there just like, I don't even think in my prime, if I would have gone like all out with this kid, I could have beat him without that gas. Like, this kid is terrifying, All Might would think. As in this moment, Izuku would finally end up waking up a couple of minutes later, and All Might would have already captured the sludge villain in the bottle, right? As Izuku would wake up and seeing this like frail and skinny man, would ask what happened, looking towards his neck as he would wonder if he freaked out again, and seeing the devastation that he caused in that area, which obviously isn't populated, so no one really noticed it besides, you know, some earthquake like feelings for the people around, but they just chalked it down to a hero versus villain fight, right? Since they're so common, no one's like really freaking out about that stuff. And so All Might now just stooped down to Deku's level, asking him if he's okay and what happened, as Izuku would say that he nearly died to a sludge villain and he blacked out. And hearing this, All Might would ask Izuku if he has any control over his quirk, but Deku would look up at him and say, I don't. I mean, how am I supposed to train with a quirk that if I let out, it could possibly hurt people? And All Might hearing that would be like, this kid is more concerned about hurting other people than getting stronger and becoming some popular hero. All Might would ask Izuku what he wants to become, and Izuku would say he wants to become a hero, but he's not so sure he can do that with this quirk. What if he hurts somebody in an attempt to save them? What if his anger gets the best of him? What if nobody can stop him? And in that moment, All Might would look at Izuku and say, well, kid, it's a good thing that I found you. How about I help you train? I help you control your quirk in a sense. I can even have Midnight help me with that. That way we can get you to use your quirk at maybe, say, 50%. Maybe you won't go too crazy. How about it, kid? That was so corny. Nah, but yeah, All Might would just look at Izuku and be like, let me help you, you know? And Izuku, being who he is, like nerding out about All Might, would be like, wait, are you serious? Like, start freaking out, just being like, you'll really help me do it? I can really become a hero? Wait, but do you really think I can do it, All Might? He would ask. As All Might would say, I know you can do it, kid. And so Izuku and All Might would begin training over the course of the next 10 months, in which during this time, Izuku would have a multitude of those, not shock collars, but like those knockout collars made for him. Like, mind you, Deku has like one for every single day of the month. Like, they basically planned it out so well, where now All Might had like a control to them, and he had multiple of those. And there was even days where Midnight was there, and like Izuku was told to like just go completely loose. Like, Midnight and All Might should be able to control him. And so over the course of the next 10 months, the first like 6 months were awful. Deku could not find any semblance of control over the Hulk, but eventually it got to the point where Izuku, after about 8 months, after about 8 months of like just completely losing control and like All Might practically losing hope because of like just how strong Deku was and how much of a hassle it was to like keep Deku to not lose control. One day, as Deku and All Might were fighting, Deku would be able to pull back, like not injure nobody and stop, as like he would let out a word just being like, I can, as he like slowly starts like losing his control again, and suddenly All Might would knock him out. And it'd be in this moment that All Might would end up telling Izuku, kid, do you remember anything that happened when you turned into the Hulk? As Deku would say, I do. For a split second, I was able to get control. As All Might would look at Deku and say, well, looks like this training wasn't for nothing. And so for the following next 2 months, Izuku would finally get to a point where Izuku isn't going to be able to use his full power when he transforms into the Hulk state, just due to the fact that he needs to be fully enraged. And when he is fully enraged, he can't control it. So he becomes like a buff version, but not like the massive Hulk version, where Izuku literally has to hold himself back to 50% of his real, not even 50%, let's go 30% of his real and utter like insane power, where Izuku's able to control that, and it's like a smaller but also buff and like huge version. The one, the one that's in the thumbnail, because he's not like massive, but he's like still buff. So that's the version of control that Deku's able to use and like not completely lose himself, right? So that's exactly the version that we're going to be going with. And so eventually, with all this happening, Izuku would finally be ready to go into the entrance exam. Like, basically, Izuku barely was able to do it by that point. And 30% Hulk Deku versus All Might would get into fights all the time, where Deku, using his knowledge, would use his punches and all that stuff. But one thing that Deku would do, unfortunately, in this timeline, again, is that he's not going to be using kicks, because he's trying to be like All Might, due to the fact that even though he doesn't have his quirk, he does have a quirk similar to All Might's, right? And because All Might understands that he can't exactly give one for all to this kid that can barely control his own quirk, he would still end up giving the quirk to Mirio, which would actually be a pretty cool thing. And so now we just jump into a timeline where Mirio having one for all would actually be a really cool thing, just because like Mirio with one for all could definitely handle villains like Overhaul. So when it comes to that whole scenario, don't even hold your breath. Like, it's not happening. And Mirio is definitely going to be going on to become one of the most powerful characters. Why did I have a lisp there? But yeah, Mirio's definitely going to go on to become one of the most powerful characters in this entire series. So yeah, don't be too surprised if Mirio and Deku end up having a crazy 1v1 battle later on. But for now, what we do need to focus on is what happens during the entrance exams, because a couple things definitely will be happening. So let's get into that. Izuku would make his way towards the area where he's going to be taking the test, but on his way there, Deku would notice a brown-haired girl, and he would notice that she was actually looking extremely flustered. He was about to go talk to her, but it would be in that moment that Bakugo would actually walk past him and would actually shoulder check Deku, as Deku would turn, being like, who did that? Looking towards Bakugo to see him grin and walk past him, as Deku would look at Bakugo and yell out, hey Bakugo, remember that rematch I owe you? I'll be waiting for you. Let me know the time and the place. And so Bakugo would smirk, as in this moment, he would shoot off an explosion with his hand and tell him that the next time they meet, it won't be so easy for Deku. As because Bakugo got so unbelievably like embarrassed the last time that he faced off against Midoriya, he definitely was not taking any chances. And the Bakugo that we get in this timeline is actually going to be a lot stronger than the one that we even get in the original timeline. Bakugo's explosions are going to be twice the size that they are in the original at this point. He's already going to be having moves like Howitzer Impact. He's going to be having an extreme control of his quirk. He's going to be having abilities like AP Shot already in the works. And his hand-to-hand combat skills are going to be way better than they are in the original. And the only reason for that is because Bakugo was training with that on his mind. Deku was so strong. And Bakugo understands, like, yeah, maybe that was middle school, but like Deku was so strong, he felt like he might as well have been fighting All Might roided out or something. So because of that reason, he trained so incredibly hard. And that's actually going to be benefiting the story, considering now they're going to be having another powerful hero on their hands, which, you know, they already do in the original, but he's going to be a little more powerful than in the original. By a little, I mean 2 times. But yeah, with that being said, what pretty much ends up going down is that Deku would eventually find himself in the examination room, where Deku would easily end up passing with a score of, say, 80. I think that that's a fair mark for something that Deku would end up doing, or maybe even more, considering that Bruce Banner is a genius. So maybe we can make Deku even more intelligent than the one that we get in the original, but I don't think that we have to, considering this isn't what if Bruce Banner was an MHA, but what if Deku had the Hulk's abilities. So yeah, with that said, I'm not going to be changing his intelligence. And eventually we would find ourselves outside, where Deku, now outside, he would just be waiting for this dumb test to start. And it'd be in this moment that Ida would actually notice Izuku looking at Uraraka. And the reason that he kept looking at her is because she just looked so zoned out. She looked so worried, and Deku wanted to go over there and tell her it's okay, you know, because Deku gets the feeling. Like, he's not going over there because he's trying to flirt or something, but Deku understands what it's like to be nervous, what it's like to not know what's going to happen. And so he went over there to give her some words of encouragement, but as he was doing that, some blue-haired boy would stop him, putting his hand on his shoulder as he would tell him, "I will not be letting you go over there and distract that young girl. Focus on your own stuff." As Deku would look at Ida being like, "But I wasn't," and it'd be in that moment that present Mike would end up being like, "What are you guys waiting for? Go, go, go." And so Deku in that moment would look at Ida as Ida would just blast off with his leg propulsors, and Izuku would say, "That guy's annoying." As in that moment, Izuku would turn into the Hulk and jump so unbelievably high that everybody would be like, "What the?" And Deku would land on a 3-pointer robot, completely smashing it and tearing it limb from limb. Grabbing one of the arms, Izuku would rush at another one and smash the arm into it as he would grab that robot by the leg and spin it around, knocking out another 4 robots. And as you can tell, Deku is basically going to go around like a pro wrestler and just absolutely destroy everything in his path. Like, there was a point where he nearly actually even ended up getting another person in the crossfire, but luckily Izuku was able to like slightly bend the trajectory just a bit, so nobody ended up getting injured, and Izuku ended up managing to rack up a grand total of 147 points by the time that the 0-pointer was finally going to be unveiled. Izuku in this moment, having all this happen, would have this huge smile on his face as he would think to himself, "I'm definitely going to be getting into UA." And so eventually we would find ourselves with Izuku watching as the ground would tremble, looking ahead of him, wondering what's going on, and seeing all the hero students running away from this gigantic 0-pointer. Izuku seeing this would be like, "What the? It's that big?" As Izuku, noticing that, would wonder to himself if he could take it out in this state without his full power. But Izuku would think, there's only one way to find out, right? And so Izuku would rush towards that direction, eager to get a punch in towards the 0-pointer robot. But as he would do so, Izuku would hear a scream, and so Izuku, jumping mid-air, would turn to see Uraraka, realizing that this 0-pointer was mere moments away from crushing her if he continued going on his trajectory. So Izuku would literally just be mid-air and reel his arm back as he would think to himself that he needs a little more strength to be able to knock this thing down completely. And so Izuku would take a massive risk and lean his arm back as BAM! He would throw a massively powerful punch at the 0-pointer that would absolutely send it crashing back and toppling over. It would not be quite as explosive as the one that we get in the original, but Izuku, as he would land, he wouldn't even have to sit there and worry about, am I gonna break my legs or anything. Izuku just literally lands perfectly, and then a giant explosion would shoot off behind him. As Izuku turns to Uraraka, asking her if she's okay, helping her with the rubble on her foot, as eventually after that would be over and Izuku would hear, "The exam is over!" Deku would shrink down into his normal form, as no, he's not going to be scrawny, he's definitely going to be like a little more buff looking than the one that we get in the original, but it would immediately be known that Izuku was definitely had some sort of strange mutation quirk or something, because of the fact that he very much transforms when he is using his quirk. Lucky for him though, he doesn't always have to be in that state. And so Uraraka would look at Deku, give him a huge smile and be like, "Thanks," and Izuku would be like, "No problem," as he would walk off and make his way towards where everybody else would be at, as Uraraka would look at Deku and she would just be blushing off the rails, like, no, that's not true. She would just have like a light blush because, you know, she likes Deku. And so now what would pretty much end up going down is that Deku would find himself in his house about 4 days later, I want to say, as eventually in the mail, Inko would end up running into Izuku's room, being like, "It's here, it's here, it's here!" And Deku would look at her and say, "What, Mom? What's here?" And she would say, your letter." And Deku would look at her and be like, "Oh, well, thanks, Mom. Let's go ahead and check it out. What do you say?" As Inko would say, "Yeah." And so Izuku and Inko would actually end up opening the letter themselves, as Izuku would realize that he got into UA, no surprise there. But not only that, but Deku was actually number 1 in the whole thing, saying that he actually got a grand total of 197 hero points because he got an extra 50 from helping Araraka from the 50 plus hero points that he ended up getting. So now Izuku would have a huge grin on his face, and Izuku would now just be happy, as Inko and himself would go out to celebrate, and eventually we're going to be fast forwarding to the first day of UA. We time skip to the first day of UA, and on this particular day, Inko would be over the moon excited, right? She would cook up some breakfast for Izuku, Izuku would eat, and just like in one of those average scenes that you would see in a movie, bro proceeds to grab one piece of toast, a sip of orange juice, and leaves this majestic breakfast behind. But in doing that, he would end up making his way to the class where he would arrive just on time, and he would actually arrive a little late, right? So this means that he would arrive there after Araraka, and so right as Araraka would be about to thank Izuku and try to start a conversation with him, Izuku would actually be interrupted by Bakugo, who would tell him, "You better remember what you said, Deku, because I'm going to hold you to that." As Deku would look at Bakugo and say, yeah, whatever, Bakugo. From here, Bakugo would tell him not to talk to him like that, getting up, blasting an explosion in his hand, as suddenly, the explosions would stop coming out, and Aizawa would stand up out of his bag, as he would tell Bakugo no quirk usage in the classroom. As Bakugo would turn and ask him who the heck he thinks he is turning his quirk off like that, with Aizawa saying, "Your homeroom teacher, put these on and meet me outside. I'm not gonna say it again." As his quirk would be flaring up, and Izuku, realizing that it's Eraserhead, would be extremely happy, realizing that Eraserhead has the potential to eliminate his quirk, doesn't he? Eraserhead could potentially stop him from rampaging as well. So this would cause Izuku to have a huge smile on his face, as Izuku would make his way towards the changing room, and once there, everybody would be staring at Deku, realizing that he's a lot stronger than he looks. And so the class would finally make their way outside, where Bakugo would be staring daggers at Deku the whole time, as suddenly, Aizawa would actually end up handing the ball to throw towards Izuku, and Izuku would grasp it in his hand before asking what this is for. And Aizawa would tell him since he got the highest score, he's going to be the one to demonstrate to the class how this is done. As so, Deku would grip the ball as hard as he could, stand inside of the circle, and throw it, reaching a maximum distance of, I don't know, what was Bakugo's score, like 700 meters? Let's go 800 meters. As Deku would smile, and from here, the rest of the class would begin getting super excited at the prospect of not only getting to use their quirks, but showing off just how powerful they all each individually are. That is until Aizawa would rain on their parade, saying, "So you think this is fun, eh? How about this? The person who comes in last place will be expelled. No exceptions." And so, everybody in the class would immediately realize that something is definitely up here. And so, Deku would end up going to go do the rest of the tests, as eventually, Izuku would find himself in a situation where now, Izuku has to do the ball through again because they're actually doing it. Except this time around, Deku's going to be the last one to go up. And when Bakugo would go up, Bakugo's score would actually be 1400 meters, with Deku being shocked at how powerful Bakugo's quirk is. And so going up towards the front of the class, Deku would look towards Aizawa before asking him if he can turn off his quirk the second that Deku releases the ball, with Aizawa asking him why, and Deku saying that he doesn't really want to tell him, at least not with everybody here. As Deku would grip the ball in his hand, and suddenly, Deku would begin expanding, growing in size, as Deku would think back to all the horrible moments in his life, and that's all that Deku has to do. He just has to let go of that limiter of his, stopping him from really letting his rage flow. And so, the second he does so, Deku would like triple in size as he would throw the ball straight up into outer space. And Deku in this moment would turn towards Aizawa with a rageful stare, with Aizawa staring at him using his erasure quirk, as Deku would go back to his normal state, thanking Aizawa, as Aizawa would ask him if he lost control of his quirk there. And Deku would say, just a bit, as he would turn towards the rest of the class and tell them that it's probably not too much of a good idea to get him angry, as they all would look at him and be like, "Dude, that is awesome." And so they would do the rest of the tests, which everybody else's scores would be the same as they would in the original, with the exception of Bakugo, since he is going to be a little stronger. This means that instead of this means that instead of Momo Yaoyorozu coming in first place, Bakugo would actually come in, I would say first place if it wasn't for Deku, but Bakugo would come in second place, and Deku would come in first. because of the fact that he got the best score in the well, he technically got infinity because it went to the stratosphere. And then when it comes to the grip strength test, Deku absolutely demolishes that. When it comes to the push-up test, Deku destroys it. Sit-up test, Deku like completely just like annihilates that test as well. And the speed test, you know, Deku doesn't do this the craziest in the world, but you know, he does very, very well. And so Deku would actually end up getting first place, or actually, nah, let's say he gets second place, because I think that Bakugo with the stronger quirk is going to be able to get first place here. And so this is sort of going to fuel Bakugo in saying, see, I told you I was stronger than you. As from here, he would walk off with a smirk on his face, and Deku would be thinking to himself that he can't wait to tear Bakugo a new one. As from here, we would end up going home, and so Deku would end up making his way towards class the very next day. Once Deku would arrive, the day would go by relatively smoothly until the last period of the day, when suddenly everybody in the classroom would be wondering when Aizawa was going to get back. He said he was going to be taking a short nap and coming back to the class soon, but he isn't. And so this would be when suddenly All Might would rush into the classroom being like, I am here, as he would then finally go on to tell the class about what's going on and how he is going to be their hand-to-hand combat teacher, or his hero training teacher, right? And so all of them would be super excited having the chance to be working with All Might. They're all losing their cool except for Deku, who, you know, obviously has already met All Might, and Bakugo, because, you know, like, he is a fanboy, but he's not going to show it. He's too prideful for that, right? And so bro might as well be Vegeta, the Saiyan pride. But yeah, no, what would pretty much end up going down after this is that they make their way towards the changing room, and eventually they would make their way outside. Here, it would finally be revealed that Izuku and Uraraka are actually going to be put up as teammates against Bakugo and Ida, just like they would be in the original. Now here, I can finally cover Deku versus Bakugo, and let me just start off by saying this is going to be a fight. Like, it's going to be a good one too, so don't even think that Deku's just going to go in here and destroy Bakugo, so it's not happening. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. Deku and Uraraka are going to be immediately going into the area, and Bakugo and Ida would be up in the bomb room, with Ida saying, alright, how are we going to do this? With Bakugo saying, look, Four Eyes, you're going to protect the bomb, and I'm going to handle the rest. As from here, Bakugo would have a mischievous grin as he would shoot an explosion in his hand and say, you're dead, Deku. And so this would be where normally in an anime episode, it would cut to like Bakugo's like face just being like a smirk, and then like the like the end of the episode, right? As we now start the next episode, and it would be Bakugo going, you're dead, Deku. And so we like now zoom in on Deku and Uraraka, who are making their way towards the lower levels of the room. Eventually, Bakugo would begin shooting explosions, making his way down the area, as Deku, hearing these explosions getting closer and closer, would turn towards Uraraka before telling her that she should probably get out of here, that Bakugo's going to be looking for him, and he's not gonna make it too easy to find him. And so what Deku would do is he would hide in a corner, and Bakugo would be just blasting off, like it's going, Deku, where are you? As Deku, knowing that Bakugo's going crazy through the hallways, would end up hiding through one of the hallway corners, and so when Bakugo would finally turn the corner, he would shoot an explosion to go like right, like turn the corner, right? Like shoot an explosion to go forward, and then shoot an explosion to turn the corner. Sorry, like I'm over here over explaining myself. But as he would do that, Deku would grab Bakugo by the face, literally instantly the second that happened, but Bakugo was not having it. He would immediately shoot two explosions right at the arm of Deku, leaving a burn mark on it, as Deku would be forced to let go, and Bakugo would say, that little trick's not gonna work anymore. Ever since the last time you did that, I've been working on a couple of countermeasures. As he would gain a little bit of distance and go, a peace shot, as Bakugo would unleash multiple shots at Deku, which would actually harm him, followed by shooting towards the direction of Deku with both of his palms back, facing backwards and shooting explosions, before then suddenly spinning mid-air and landing a full-blown, like full-powered kick straight to the back of Deku's head, with Deku being stunned, being like, since when did Bakugo? As Bakugo would begin shooting explosion after explosion, followed by a smoke screen that he would shoot up with all the smoke that's going up, and Bakugo shooting toward an explosion at the wall, he would cause Deku to believe that he's over there, and so he would swing his arm over there. But it'd be in that moment that Bakugo would weave the blow and punch Deku square in the face with a full-powered explosion, causing Deku to be sent flying back a bit, as Deku would begin getting angrier and angrier by the second, and Bakugo would say, "Remember that rematch you owed me? How does it feel, Deku, to know that this time you're the one on the losing end?" Throwing explosion after explosion after explosion after explosion at Deku. As suddenly, Deku would finally get angrier and angrier, tapping into more of his power, beginning to go into his 40% stage, as he finally would hit the ground, causing the ground that they were on to go down to the ground, and Deku would now have cleared the smoke because the smoke was up there as Deku and Bakugo were down there. Deku would rush at Bakugo, throwing a full powered punch straight at Bakugo's stomach, sending him flying into one of the walls, as Bakugo would wipe blood off of his lips and say, "There he is, there's the monster that I remember," as he would say, "and monsters have to be taken down, right? As a hero, it's my duty," as he would say, "Well, I guess not now since I am a villain," as he would then go on and grab both of the pins of his gauntlets, not one, but both of them, holding both arms out, with Deku's eyes widening, as All Might would scream, "Don't do it, Bakugo!" But Bakugo would say, "He'll be fine, he's a monster, remember?" And so the explosion would shoot full force at Deku, who wouldn't have any way of countering it, as the explosion would be so unbelievably massive that Deku just had no way of countering it. Deku would take the blunt of the explosion full force, and I know I said that it was actually going to be both gauntlets, but I actually want it to be one because of a certain scene that I want to have play out in just a couple of moments. So yeah, let's continue. Okay, so after that explosion would be let off, Izuku would be there with his clothes in tatters, as the only thing remaining would basically be his shorts, and Deku would look at Bakugo as he would be like, "I can't believe that you would be willing to kill me." And Bakugo would say, "You're still in one piece, but you might as well give up." As Deku would look at Bakugo and rage would begin filling him completely. Deku in this moment would remember getting flashbacks to every single act of humiliation that Bakugo had given him up to that point. As Deku would say, "You know, Bakugo, that day that I hurt you, I don't think I did lose control. I think that was my own ambition." As he would then begin growing in size and his voice would begin deepening, as he would say, "And now I'm gonna crush you." As he would be like, "Hulk smash!" As he would immediately smash at the ground, causing Bakugo and Deku to drop down another level. As he would rush in roaring at Bakugo and grab Bakugo by the leg, as he would slam him on the ground over and over before throwing him through one of the building walls, and All Might would begin saying, "Izuku, stop!" And he would end up screaming it over the intercom, but Deku just lost it. Deku would punch Bakugo in the face, sending him crashing through another wall, as he would grab him by the face, slamming him into the wall and dragging him by it, as he would then finally grab Bakugo, lift him up, and be about to smash him over his knees, basically breaking his back. But in that moment, All Might would click the button, as the pheromones would not only go off on Deku, but a shock collar would end up going off, as Deku would begin feeling the power of it, and he would begin shaking, be like as he lets out a massive roar. And Deku just is not having it. He doesn't want to lose control. So he would toss Bakugo back, as Deku in that moment would literally just sit there and be fighting it, having only another 10 seconds or so of controlling of not passing out, as he would begin walking towards Bakugo with a huge grin on an evil grin on his face, as Bakugo would let go of the other pin, saying, "Stay back." And so that pin would be completely let go of, and the explosion would go towards Deku, but Deku's not having it. He collapsed, creating a force of wind so powerful that the explosion would actually end up being completely nullified, and Deku rushes in towards Bakugo with a massive screech, being about to practically punch Bakugo's head off, clean off of his body. But suddenly, as Deku was doing that, he would lose control of himself, slipping as he falls onto the ground, completely out cold. And Bakugo would now be standing there in actual fear, literally shivering. It'd be in this moment that Uraraka would make her way towards the bomb room, and once there, she would end up trying to take Ida out, knowing that Izuku was out of the equation. And so Uraraka having to face off against Ida just wouldn't be a good match for her. So ultimately, the villain team would end up winning this time around. But if we're being honest, had All Might not done that, the hero team definitely would have won. But in this moment, Deku wasn't caring about whether the hero team won or not. He was actually worried about Bakugo because the beating that he gave to Bakugo was very severe. It was similar to the one that he gave him the first time around. And now Deku would wake up in Recovery Girl's room, as on the other side of him would be Bakugo, who was now covered in blood and just absolutely not having a good time. And Deku would not only have Bakugo in there, but he would actually also have All Might there, who would actually be asking Izuku why he did that back there, as Izuku would have his head down saying that he just lost control. Bakugo was landing so many hits on him, hurting him so bad that he remembered what it was like to be on the other end of those hits back when he was powerless, and it brought him to a rage that he just couldn't let go of. As All Might would ask Izuku if what he said back there about him really being in control when he beat him the first time around was true. As Izuku would say, "I don't know, All Might, but I hate the fact that I said that. I need to apologize to him." He would go over to the other side of the room. As he would take off the curtain, seeing Bakugo, who was awake, he would say, "I'm sorry, Bakugo." But Bakugo wouldn't say nothing, just looking at Deku with eyes that show hate and fear and also disappointment. As Deku would look towards the direction of Bakugo, and Bakugo would say, "Get out of here, you damn Deku." As from here, Deku would just look down before saying, "I mean it, Bakugo. I'll make it up to you." As Bakugo would say, "You can't." And suddenly Bakugo would just sit there as he watches Deku leave the room, and All Might would just watch as Deku would leave with such a sad expression on his face. You could tell in that moment that Deku genuinely didn't want to take it that far. He just wanted to win. He doesn't want to hurt people. Deku made that clear from the first day All Might met him. So All Might would say that he'll take care of it. As from here, he would say that normally he would probably have to be forced to expel Deku or something, but since both of them took it too far, under these circumstances, they're both going to be allowed to remain in the UA school program. And so we would eventually end up getting a 2-week time skip in which during this time, all of Bakugo's injuries were finally healed and Deku was finally now back in UA, since he did actually end up getting suspended for 3 days. Well, I know that I said finally now back in, but you get what I mean. He was just in the classroom. Eventually Aizawa would come up to them as he would ask them if they all had their permission slips signed. And so everybody in the class would say, "Yup, sure did," as they eventually would all end up boarding a bus, and this bus would actually be for the USJ event, right? Once they would end up arriving, Hero 13 would end up giving the most boring speech in the world, as eventually a purple mist portal would end up appearing in the center of the USJ. And seeing this, Kirishima would say, "That's so manly. You guys even have fake villains here?" As in that moment, Aizawa would finally jump to action saying, "Those are real villains." And in that moment, everybody would end up being teleported away who was in the original, right? As Deku would land in water, as realizing that villains are actually going to be going after him, Deku would immediately transform into his Hulk state, as Deku would jump out of the water without Suyu's help, mind you, and then seeing all the villains in the water, Deku would think to himself that there's only one thing he can do, jumping up into the air, as he would let a punch go right into the water, as Deku would end up creating the same vortex that he would in the original and jump towards the land, as Suyu and Mineta would end up doing the same thing by themselves, and eventually Izuku, once he would make it to the shore, he would actually see Aizawa facing off against a multitude of villains. And Deku, seeing this happening, wouldn't be able to just stand by and watch as Aizawa had to handle all of them. In fact, it looked like Aizawa was getting overwhelmed. So Izuku would jump into the midst of the battle, helping Aizawa out, with Aizawa saying, "Go with the rest of your classmates." But Deku would say, "I'll take the consequences of what I'm doing now. I can't let you fight on your own." And Aizawa would grit his teeth saying, "Fine, follow my lead." So Deku and Aizawa would go on to take out all these villains, with Shigaraki finally making his presence known, as he would say, "So, heroes, you were able to defeat some of my minions. Well, let's see how you handle against this. Nomu, kill them." The Nomu would finally come flying out, rushing towards the direction of Aizawa, as it would punch him square in the face. Mind you, Aizawa had turned his quirk off, but Aizawa would be sent flying back, as Deku would watch the Nomu, hear it screech, and in that moment, Deku would lunge at the Nomu, as he would punch it square in the jaw, and the Nomu wouldn't even be bothered. Deku would have an insanely shocked expression on his face, thinking to himself that he can't remember the last time someone just tanked the punch. Only All Might could do that. And so realizing that, he would put two and two together and go, I need to fight this thing like it's All Might. And so he would rush in at it, and himself and this beast would go at it as they would land blow after blow after blow, with Deku doing better and better against the Nomu by the second, as Deku would unfortunately have to ramp up his power to an even higher degree, getting up to a 50% stage, as Deku would now like low-key begin losing control of himself as he would land blow after blow after blow on the Nomu, and Shigaraki watching this would be terrified, like, what? How is he doing that? He shouldn't be Kurogiri. What's going on? As Kurogiri would basically just tell a Shigaraki that that kid's quirk is insanely powerful. As we would have like a little monologue moment with the villains in the background, and Deku and the Nomu would continue going at it, blow after blow after blow, as Deku would eventually like punch the Nomu so hard he begins beating its head in, as he would then grab the Nomu by the shoulder and begin like bringing him down into the earth, as he would begin to push the Nomu's body into the actual ground itself, grabbing both of his arms, ripping them off, roaring in the Nomu's face, as he would use its arms to literally hit it in the face over and over and over and over again, as the Nomu's arms would finally rip into mush and just the guts that are in there, as Deku would see that the two arms are healing back together, and Deku would have an evil grin on his face, as Deku would go full force, grabbing the Nomu by one of the arms, dragging him out as he spins him and throws him as hard as he possibly can, as Deku would watch as the Nomu's body would be sent flying out of there, and Deku would roar, as everybody around there, realizing that now they have an even bigger problem on their hands, Deku would rush in towards the direction of Shigaraki, as a portal would appear in front of him right before Deku could tear him limb from limb, and Shigaraki would be teleported out of there, as Deku would then just be teleported to the water section again, as he would let out a roar and just jump out of there, as Aizawa would click the button and Deku would finally be knocked out. Right, because Deku was teleported to an area where Aizawa couldn't have direct eye contact with him, and so like he couldn't see him, you know what I mean? So that had to have happened, and would eventually get to a point where Deku now falls unconscious on the ground, and everybody would finally like finish with their villains that they're all handling, as after this would happen, the heroes would be interrogated, as they would be asked questions about the villain situation, and eventually we would get a 2-week time skip in which the students would basically have just been told that due to the unfortunate events, they're going to be having to close UA for a little bit as they deal with the with the backlash of the event that just happened, how villains were even capable of even getting there. And so, you know, UA having to deal with that stuff, they kind of are in a little bit of a pickle, but it's nothing that UA can't handle. I mean, after all, it is UA, the most prestigious hero school in the world. So because of this, we're free to skip straight over to when the sports festival happens. Now, unfortunately, this is where something kind of lame is going to be having to happen, just because if I don't have this specific lame thing happen, Deku is not going to be remaining a hero for much longer. And that's because Deku would definitely lose control during the UA sports festival, and this would lead a bunch of people to start saying he shouldn't be a hero, that he's more like a villain, that he's unstable, and yada yada yada. You get the point. And you may be wondering, when would this happen? Okay, well look, let me put it like this. The race, nothing's gonna happen. Maybe Deku might get a little mad, but he'll probably end up being 2nd or 3rd place. Cavalry battle. Deku would end up getting through that no problem. Since he won't have the 10 million point headband, nothing will happen. However, once he gets to his first battle against Shinso, he's definitely losing control. Keep in mind, Shinso has a mind erasure quirk, where Deku won't be in control of his body. The other guy will. The other guy being Hulk. And if he's in control, Deku is going to lash out, maybe even kill Shinso. And with that, he's probably going to put everybody there in danger. So as a safety precaution, with Nezu not wanting anything like that to happen during this event, he would actually end up telling Izuku that he's not going to be participating in this. Instead, Izuku is going to be outlawed, and they're going to be say that it's because Deku is like really hurt from the fight that he had, yada yada, or something along those lines. So Deku's going to be having to wear like a fake cast or something during the whole sports festival, where everybody in the class is going to know that Deku isn't injured, but honestly, they're going to think that it's for the best, considering that none of them want to even go up against Deku if he was to lose control. Matter of fact, they don't even want to go up against him when he's in control. That dude is a monster. He's a tank. And so, because of this, the sports festival event would go down and Bakugo would be the winner. But he wouldn't even be accepting it. He'd be like, this isn't fair. This isn't a real victory. I might as well have lost this thing. and he would like throw his medal on the ground as he would walk off. And so right after this, what would pretty much end up going down is we will be getting a time skip, in which during this little time skip, what's pretty much going to be happening is we're going to be zooming in on the classroom as like the pages, like the way that I would do it if I was animating it is the page would flip and it would say the next day, as it would be everybody in class and they would all be told about their picking hero names, right? Because Deku wasn't in the sports festival, this would mean that Izuku didn't get any specific offer from anybody, specifically, right? And so unfortunately, this does mean that Deku isn't going to be present for the Hosu incident. He's not going to be going with Gran Torino. Mirio is. So luckily, Ida still is going to be getting saved because of that. But Deku is, instead of having all that situation and craziness happen, he's actually going to be working with Nezu in order to actually control his power. But not only Nezu, All Might and Midnight. Those are the people that Deku's going to be interning with. 3 people who are going to be trying to help Deku get more control of his quirk. And so by the end of it, Deku is now going to be able to control approximately 50% of his quirk without going absolutely haywire. Meaning he's able to access 50% of his power without starting to lose it. Once he gets to 60, Deku starts being a little more unstable. But yeah, once we get to that point, that's all that pretty much happens during the course of this arc. And because that is the case, there's really nothing to cover here. Deku's hero name is obviously going to be the Hulk. So, there's no need to cover any of those things. And eventually we would now get into the final exams, in which I'm finally able to go into crazy detail on a fight between Deku and All Might, which is going to be just absolutely insane. But before that, I can actually see the teachers beginning to talk things out, wondering if Deku should even be allowed to go up against the teachers. Maybe Midnight, Nezu would suggest. And Midnight hearing this would go, no. There's no way I'm fighting that kid by myself. You're out of your mind. So Midnight would be chalked off the board. Then you have Aizawa. And Aizawa, pretty much having already been assigned to Todoroki and Momo via himself doing that, he would end up declining, saying that the last person to face off against Deku would be All Might. And All Might hearing that would be like, couldn't we leave it to a vote? He doesn't want to fight Deku, because it's just like, the way that villains are scared to fight against All Might is how scared All Might is to fight against Deku, which is kind of ironic. But regardless, Deku and All Might would be paired up against each other, with Deku and Bakugo on the same teams, which would ultimately lead the two of them to sit down in a room together and begin to think about what strategies they're going to use. As Deku's trying to strategize with Bakugo, Bakugo would probably look at Deku and say, "Hey, shut up! Don't bark orders at me like you're the leader of this whole thing. I'm gonna do what I want and you can just sit back and watch, Deku. I'm gonna show everybody here that they were wrong in not letting you participate in the sports festival. I would have beat you." But as those words leave Bakugo's lips, even he himself would know that, well, it's a lie. So, trying to prove this to himself in an act of defiance at his own conscience and mind, he would rush at All Might with all of the strength and all of the things that he could pull at his disposal at once. But All Might, knowing that a battle between Bakugo and Deku was just something that he wasn't going to be able to sustain, especially not with his time limit having been lowered after constant fights against Deku, and that was at 30%. So, with that being said, he would take Bakugo out very quickly, rushing at him, not holding anything back, would punch Bakugo square in the stomach, sending him into the air as he would cough out some blood before saying, "Sorry, young Bakugo," and punching him square in the jaw, sending him crashing into the building. Bakugo, being sent flying by those punches, would slowly get back up as he'd say, "Damn it. You don't punch as hard as Deku, do ya?" As he would kind of like move his jaw a little bit, popping it back into place. But before he could even try anything, All Might, rushing at Bakugo once again, would end up hitting him once more, sending him crashing through that building, as Bakugo now would fully be taken out. Him not having expected All Might to come in that fast would end up then leading to Izuku, transformed into his 50% state, would look at All Might, cracking his fingers as he would ask him how he wants to do this. Does he want him to hold back, or does he want him to show the entire world that he's already stronger than him? All Might, hearing that, would have a smirk on his face as he would say, "I think it's about time I passed the torch," as he would smirk at Deku, telling him, "Go all out." And so, Deku, cracking the floor, blitzing at All Might, would collide fists. In this moment, All Might's arm would actually break, as his arm would be sent back, and everyone watching this through the little cameras and speakers and stuff would go, "What? He just broke All Might's arm. Is Izuku truly stronger than All Might?" Then, out of nowhere, Izuku
ending up using a boxer-like move would weave in, out, before then throwing a hook right at the direction of All Might's face. This would send the symbol of peace crashing into 3 buildings, as he would ultimately have smoke and debris begin shooting up, covering the cameras, as the second that it would all clear out, All Might would hold a thumbs up at the air. As weakly holding it up, this would let everybody know that he gives up. This would lead Deku and Bakugo both being the winners, as Bakugo in this timeline would end up going the extra training system that the teachers would have implemented for all the failure students, which is kind of crazy. But anyways, what would end up taking place after this would essentially be the Forest training camp arc, in which during this timeline, the students aren't really going to be dealing with too much hardship when it comes to the mud monsters that they face off against, because now they have a way more powerful Bakugo there who is writhing at the teeth wanting some combat, and they have Deku, who is stronger than All Might. So safe to say, they would end up arriving to the actual training camp at 12 at exactly the same time that the pro heroes would, as Mandalay and the rest of the Wild Pussycats would go on to cook them up some grub, and we get a normal training camp arc. Well, at least until the Vanguard Action Squad strikes, because that's still gonna happen. That aside though, I'm way too excited to cover a Deku versus Muscular fight, so I kind of just want to skip straight to that. So sorry for all of you guys that would have wanted me to just yap for an extra minute, but Deku versus Muscular, let's go. Deku going over to Kota to see how he was doing and see if he was alright, would end up seeing a man with a cloak who would reveal himself to be Muscular. Deku, seeing this villain, would say, "What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be on UA grounds." As Muscular would say that he's just here to have some fun, reeling his arm back and pretty much saying, "You're not on the list," going to throw a punch at the direction of Kota. However, Deku, transforming into his Hulk state 20%, would catch Muscular's fist, saying, "What do you think you're doing? Attacking a child!" He would grow in size, as rushing to the direction of Muscular, he would punch him square into the mountainside, with Muscular being sent flying into it, having used a bunch of muscles to shield his face. In this moment, Muscular, looking at Deku, would say, "So much power, I want more!" He would rush in at Deku's direction, amping up his muscles to their max state, as Deku, looking at Kota, would say, "Get out of here," as he would rush back in towards the direction of Muscular, and with the 50% punch matching up against Muscular's hit himself, this dude would proceed to absolutely destroy each and every single muscle fiber that was trying to contend with Izuku. As in this moment, Deku would have a weird smirk on his face, as he would then go on to pummel Muscular into the actual mountain, blow after blow after blow. This would cause a thunderous shaking in the area, with Muscular being completely knocked unconscious and his body shrinking into its normal state. With Deku seeing that, he would finally stop pulling back, his fist having practically no damage, and him being not even a little tired, would turn to Kota as he would ask him if he's okay. Kota would look at Deku, a bit of fear in his eyes, as Deku would shrink back into his normal state, looking at him with the look of just concern and care. Kota would say, "Thank you," as he would remember what Deku had just transformed into. He would feel fear, but he would then remember that that's his hero. So, pushing every feeling that he had to the side, he would go on to thank Izuku before he would take him to Aizawa, who would go on to take care of the kid. With this happening, Deku would go into the forest, transform, as leaping up into the air, he would begin scouring around the area, seeing a glimpse of Tokiyami and his friend Shoji. Landing on the ground before them, he would ask what's wrong, as Tokiyami would say, "Get away!" But Deku would have a slight smirk on his face, saying, "A monster you can't control? How ironic." He would blitz in towards his direction, as he would punch square at Dark Shadow's face, sending Tokiyami crashing into multiple parts of the forest. As he would finally wake up, or kind of just stay unconscious, he would end up telling Shoji to take care of him. As leaping back into the air, Deku would notice Bakugo and Todoroki, who in this timeline he doesn't know Bakugo's on some sort of list, and so the second he would land, knowing that they're having trouble because they could light up the forest ablaze with their quirks, Deku would rush in at Moonfish, who, shooting his iron teeth at him, would simply punch right through them. Moonfish, feeling true terror, as Deku, with one rageful scream, would say, "Smash!" He would blow straight through Moonfish, sending him crashing into a tree, thrashing him even harder than Tokiyami's Dark Shadow would have in the original, as the three of them would rush to the direction of Uraraka and who was it? Toga and Tsuyu? Yeah, Toga and Tsuyu. Once doing this, Toga, being who she is, knowing that she can't win this fight, would say, "I gotta go. I don't feel like dying tonight." She would rush off, getting a glimpse of Izuku in this timeline, not being like, "Oh, he's so," because he's not covered in blood. She wouldn't end up getting that same attraction that she gets for him in the original. As we would then move on from this part of the story and get the students rushing to the direction of the aid of more. But as they're doing this, we would actually end up getting all of them noticing that Bakugo, he was gone. Mr. Compress had taken him in this timeline, and with Tokiyami being in a different location with Shoji, the villains don't actually end up taking him. Instead, Bakugo would be the only one the villains would target, and as Deku would be chasing to the direction of Mr. Compress would be using tons of tactics to keep him away from Deku, as Deku finally coming face to face with them would end up seeing Dabi, who shooting his flames at the direction of Deku would cause him to have to cover his eyes. But continuing to run forth like the tank that he is, he would rush into the portal that they would drag Bakugo into. As landing into the bar of the League of Villains, we would have Shigaraki be stunned. "You brought him here, you damn villains!" As they would all pretty much say they're sorry, and Magna, using his magnetism ability, would try to shoot Deku with his ability, sending him flying. However, Deku would stand still, with Dabi shooting his max fire outputage towards his direction, knowing that this might hurt the rest of them. He would tell them all to get down. But as the flames would hit Izuku would just get angrier and angrier. These flames would actually cause a significant amount of pain for Deku, and that was where the villains made a mistake. Because the second that Deku gets angry, he started losing control. 60% of that guy would be unlocked. And as Deku would rush to the direction of Dabi, squeezing his face with his hand, he would slam him onto the ground. Dabi's eyes turning white as spit would come out of his mouth, and Deku would then turn towards Magna, rushing him, taking the dude down with a simple clap, just going as wind pressure would knock Magna down to the ground, and Deku then turning towards the leader, he would say, "Puny leader, get smashed!" As he would grab Shigaraki by the leg, slamming him back and forth similarly to what he would have done to Loki. All the while Mr. Compress, Twice, and Toga are all watching in utter fear. It'd be in this moment that I can see Mr. Compress maybe potentially making an escape or trying to use his quirk on Deku, which might actually work. So Deku being turned into an orb ball with all of his rage would actually leave Mr. Compressor to say, "I've taken him down, Shigaraki," to which Shigaraki on the ground, like practically covered in blood, feeling so much rage would say, "That damn kid, take him out so that I could decay him with my own hands." Mr. Compress would say that's not a smart idea, but holding the orb in his hand, it would suddenly start cracking, and Izuku would come out even more angry than before, 70%. This is on some Mob Psycho type timing, as Deku launching a punch at Mr. Compress would shatter his arm and ribcage, sending him crashing out of the building, as police and authorities would finally start realizing that something is definitely going on in whatever built bar that was, that abandoned building. Something was happening. Deku then turning towards Shigaraki would grab both of his hands, as clasping them on Shigaraki's head, crushing the dude's skull, would kill him. As then turning to the direction of Toga, who was one of the last ones there, stabs her knife into Deku, trying to drain blood to maybe transform into him, would actually have her knife break upon contact with Deku. As in one moment, Deku would swing his arm at the direction of Toga and send her flying out the building, breaking multiple bones, when suddenly black portals would actually appear, as some of the members of the League of Villains would start to disappear. This is when out of nowhere, All For One, making his presence felt for the first time, would wrap an insane amount of Black Whip tendrils, or not those tendrils, but the ones that he used against All Might, to all wrap around Izuku. And as Izuku would struggle to break free, All For One would tell him that it's impossible, that at the moment he was using multiple enhancer quirks to make that even more potent, that even All Might in his prime wouldn't be able to break out. But as Izuku was struggling to break out, looking at the villain who was standing in front of him would shatter these things, anger rising to 80%. He would then rush at the direction of All For One, who using a barrier quirk would try to stop the blow, but it would shatter straight through it as he would send a blow at All For One's stomach, sending him crashing into another building. This would blow up the normal level as debris would fall on All For One, who using a wind quirk would actually stop it from hitting him, then catching a glimpse of Deku flying at him as he would use a quirk to force Deku to be sent flying. Using his own momentum against him, this would actually send Deku flying backwards as landing on the ground, Deku would smash his fists on it as a massive earthquake would be felt in the entire area, and he would stare at the direction of All For One with rage rising. He just wanted to kill him, and that was all he wanted. In this moment, Deku would lunge at All For One, his feet shattering the ground, creating a split in the earth, as Deku rushing towards him would send a blow that no matter how many quirks All For One tried using to stop this momentum, it wasn't stopping it. Tendrils would start holding him back, but the momentum would grow more and more. 90, 95, 96, 100. The rage would completely overwhelm Izuku as the punch would be so powerful that the wind pressure of the entire area, every cloud present would be sent flying backwards, and as the blow would connect with All For One, his entire legs, body, he would just explode. Blood would crash out everywhere, and as that would happen, Izuku would let out the loudest roar of the entire series, as everybody would hear it nationwide, with Izuku roaring louder and louder, beginning to hit at his chest, as Deku, looking down at the dead body of All For One, would suddenly have a tear coming down one of his eyes, knowing that he had just killed someone. It'd be at this point that Deku would end up snapping back into it, as looking at his hand still in his 100% state would think, I killed someone. The reality would set in for Izuku, and he would proceed to actually just kind of sit there, falling down to his hands and knees, reverting back to his normal state, as the authorities would finally end up arriving and essentially question Deku on everything that happened. Bakugo eventually would be decompressed because of Mr. Compressor's quirk having ran out or whatever, and after Bakugo would be taken out and seeing all the mayhem that Deku had caused, he would think he's a monster. But regardless, after the entire situation would be over, we would get a scene in which Deku and All Might together in a room would begin talking about what happened, with All Might telling him not to feel bad, that at the end of the day, kill him or not, that was one of the greatest villains that this world has ever seen, and Deku just did a service to the world. He would tell him that the authorities have agreed to essentially allow this situation to go under wraps, that nobody's gonna know that it even happened or he was the cause. They're gonna be essentially saying that the League of Villains had an altercation, and that's what led to all this situation happening. Deku would say that shouldn't happen, that he should be reprimanded because what he did was villainous. But All Might would tell him that what he did was take out a villain that all of the generations of All For One One For All have been trying to handle, and he did it in one night. He also stopped the League of Villains, which is an organization that has been a thorn in their side for as long as he can remember. As far as All Might's concerned, Deku's nothing less of a hero. And as Izuku would look at the eyes of All Might, seeing the sincerity in them, Izuku would think, you're right, All Might. I guess I was just... But All Might, waving at Izuku, would say, don't worry about it, kid. I know what it's like. A long time ago, I had thought that I had killed All For One, but really, I failed. But you truly did it, and you should be proud. Killed them or not, you are not a killer. Deku, looking at All Might's direction, would smile as they would all return to normal school life, and after about a week, with Izuku, talking to a counselor and him kind of just sitting through the motions, would end up understanding that he did what was necessary and he saved Bakugo. Bakugo never would thoroughly thank him. Maybe he'd get a moment where Bakugo would go up to Deku and be like, I didn't need your help, Deku, and turn around angrily, kind of like he does in the beginning of the anime. But regardless of that, we're now able to jump into the final villain, which consists of Overhaul, which, speaking of, finally, I just finished the Overhaul arc in the anime once again, and I just have to say, I forgot how incredibly good this arc was. So safe to say, in one of my future what ifs, I'm definitely going to go in depth. But Not this time. Deku is the Hulk. And when he sees a young Eri running at his legs, essentially telling him not to let her go, and her showing just how much fear is in her heart, there is nobody that was going to be stopping Deku from rescuing her today. Not Mirio, not Tsunade, and certainly not Overhaul. That said, after Izuku would meet the big three, Deku would also meet Mirio. He has his whole introduction section, which, speaking of, after watching season 4, I love Mirio's character even more. He would be a character who, even though he's not able to damage Deku per se with his normal powers without One For All, obviously, Deku would actually be able to tank them. Then suddenly, when Mirio actually taps into One For All and punches Deku, this would lead a bit of green blood to ooze off of Deku, who would smile and then clap at the air, causing a massive wave of air to come in. This is when Deku and Mirio would be about to get serious, as One For All, Mirio was gonna rush at Deku, who was the Hulk. Suddenly, Aizawa using his quirk on the both of them would stop each of them, Deku reverting back to his normal state and Mirio losing his permeation and One For All. However, his momentum would have been too great and he would go thumping into Deku. The both of them crash on the ground with the naked Mirio on Deku's body, as Deku would say, "Get off of me!" And Mirio's like, "Oh, dude, sorry." But regardless of the funny moment, Aizawa would tell the two of them that a fight between the two of them going all out would not exactly be good for their school. So he tells them that they could do that some other day maybe. Maybe they can team up or something, but a fight between heroes like this, not exactly smart. After this would take place, Mirio would end up acknowledging that Aizawa, well, he was kind of right. And so, Izuku and Mirio would talk after school, with Mirio actually suggesting to Deku to come work with Tsunade. This would lead Izuku to taking that Tsunade internship, as we would then end up getting the scene where Mirio and Deku go on the patrol. They're walking around, and as Mirio would be explaining what it's like to be an actual hero and do patrols, he would tell him that hero life is actually quite simple. Well, whenever he's not facing off against villains, that is. He would go on to tell him how much he's learned from Tsunade, and he would go on to explain what it's like to be the inheritor of One For All. That would be a big point of conversation, until suddenly a little girl rushing out from an alleyway would bump into Deku's leg. She would squeeze onto him, as Deku, looking at her, would see the bandages and the fear in his eyes. He would then turn and see Overhaul, the same person that Tsunade had pretty much warned them about, telling them that if they see him, not to do anything because he's a high priority or whatever. This is when Deku, noticing that she's clearly being abused by this guy, would look at Mirio, and Mirio also feeling the same way, nah, I'm not gonna be able to call myself a hero if I just let this girl go back to him. Both of them in tandem would proceed to use their own quirks, with Izuku telling Eri to stand behind him. It'd be at this moment that Overhaul would start taking his glove off to prepare using his quirk, but Deku would clasp his hands as a wind force so powerful that all the windows in the area would shatter. Overhaul would be sent up into the air as the wind pressure would be too much, unable to make contact with anything to create spikes or attacks at them, as Mirio, shooting through the wall, would rush in with a 50% smash, clasping right at the stomach of Overhaul. This would send the dude completely unconscious, similar to the blows that Deku would have landed at him when he transformed into his gigantic Overhaul state, as Overhaul would be taken to police authorities, and after the big boss would be taken care of, the raid would still happen. However, with no Overhaul or big target, and us having a Mirio who has an incredible control over One For All, plus the Hulk is literally there's just no world in which these villains were going to contend. So with Shigaraki, the League of Villains, All For One, and even Overhaul now having been taken care of, there's no ultimate big bad for the series, which means that from here, the heroes go on to pretty much continue UA, have their second year sports festival, which Deku finally participates in, having understood his quirk. He would win, destroying everybody, with people being like, dang, he's that strong, and Izuku finally coming out to the limelight. Then we get a time skip to Deku and his wife, which I'm going to be saying is Uraraka in this timeline still, and with the final thing being Deku's hero chart standing. I'm going to be saying that Deku, due to, the monster that he transforms into, he's not too popular, but he is an incredible hero. He would probably be the 4th ranked hero in Japan, which is a pretty good standings for him. But ladies and gentlemen, with that said, that's where I'm going to be ending What If Deku Was the Hulk. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this video down below in the comments. Shout out to the person who ended up commissioning this video, and thank you so very much for watching.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video! Like it or die! That wasn't the line, Kachan! Whatever!